If you enjoy our podcast, please like and subscribe and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us bring you more content like this. You can find this episode and all of our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. See the show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading news.
Welcome back to Rounding Up the Roundhouse, the Albuquerque Journal's Legislature podcast. It's Monday, February 2nd. I'm John Miller, and today our Capitol reporter Dan Boyd and I are back to catch everyone up on the latest news from the 30-day session. Dan, we have less than 3 weeks to go in the 30-day session. How are we feeling so far?
Yeah, it's definitely a sprint. The sprint is on at the Roundhouse. We're entering the third week of the session, but already this week is going to be the halfway point on Wednesday, which marks the deadline for bill introduction. So, it feels like the session just started, but already, the clock is ticking a little bit, and we're seeing some bills moving forward kind of toward the governor's desk, and other bills that are, not moving as quickly. And then, time starts to be a consideration as we move into the second half of the session.
Definitely, it really moves quickly when you're here in the thick of it. So just moving on to the first sort of topic last week, to remind listeners, we had two of our reporters on. Jillian Barkhurst talked about the Immigrant Safety Act, and Nikayla McClellan and I talked about public safety bills that are moving through the Roundhouse this year. So just sort of trying to catch up on what's been going on lately. Dan, can you recap just sort of what you were working on last week and what you anticipate focusing on this week?
Yeah, so today, a significant development, the House Appropriations and Finance Committee rolled out its budget bill. This is the bill that pays for all state agencies and programs for the coming fiscal year that starts in July. So I'll have a story on that in tomorrow's paper, but, kind of the gist of it, spending will increase under this bill, but not as much as we've seen in last year's. And it does give some, but not all of the funding that the governor has sought for Universal Child Care Initiative. And that's kind of the program, providing child care assistance for all New Mexico families. And the committee, kind of authorized some of the funding the governor wanted, but then said there may have to be some co-pays or things like that for kind of higher income families. So still kind of yet to be seen exactly how that shakes out, but kind of trying to find a compromise. And we'll see if the governor's, fully on board with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like a difficult selling point when it's your last year in office to add a $160 million price tag onto the budget right before you leave. So that'll be interesting to see what happens there. I know medical malpractice bills are moving forward along with more healthcare legislation. We saw the interstate compacts bills. I believe 7 of those are now moving on to Senate committees. Can you tell us what is happening on those fronts?
Yeah, so these compact bills they're dealing with physical therapists, dentists, all sorts of different kind of professions, but they all have one approval in the House, but they were also approved by the House last year and didn't make it out of the Senate. So, we'll see when the rubber meets the road if they do have support in the Senate this year. There does seem to be support, in both chambers for the medical compact for doctors. That bill already did pass the Senate and now waiting for a final vote in the House. So we could see that, in the coming days. Healthcare, I think, certainly is a major issue during this legislative session. You mentioned medical malpractice, and I did cover one bill sponsored by Representative Christine Chandler that's gotten probably the most attention so far. It passed its first committee on Friday, but there was a significant amendment to the bill that would kind of exclude certain types of hospitals from a proposed cap on punitive damages, and that's really emerged as kind of the sticking point in this talk about how to fix the medical malpractice laws. So still a long ways to go for that bill, and we'll see if that amendment stays in place or maybe gets removed going forward. But that's one we're also keeping our eye on. And John, I know today you were covering a Senate Judiciary Committee meeting on the immigration bill, which is another issue that's drawn a lot of attention. And what can you tell listeners about how that committee hearing went?
Well, first of all, it started very, very late, and it was moved from a committee room into the Senate chambers, partly because there was such a large turnout in the gallery. There were a lot of people who were interested in this bill. a lot of different sides represented. I know SOMOS and Immigrant Advocacy Agency was represented very strongly there, and the outcome was it passed. Some of the discussion, most of the discussion, I would say, surrounded the economic impact that it would have on Otero County in particular, where we have one of the largest detention centers in the state, a major employer for the area, and some of the criticism from Republican leadership in the Senate had to do with the fact that if the bill were to pass as legislation this year, it really may not have that great of an impact on whether people are detained or not. There are, of course, other ICE detention centers in the Southwest throughout the country. So the argument was, well, Otero County, for example, has some good markers apparently where it comes to measures of, a good facility, well run, humane conditions. So if we were to remove our contracts with the federal government to run that facility, that it might just remove our control from operating a good facility. So just some interesting back and forth there, but it did pass, and we're going to see what happens next. Do you have is that on your radar at all? I know Jillian was covering that for us quite a lot last week.
I mean, I think worth pointing out that just procedurally, it's interesting. This bill was just passed Friday on the House floor by a 40-29 vote, and wasn't initially on the agenda for the Senate Judiciary Committee today, but the committee report was read in and it was referred to committee. So that kind of thing can be done. It's not a violation of the rules, but usually we see that more kind of in the final days of a session. And interesting that Senate leadership clearly wanting to fast track this bill, get it to the governor's desk. I believe it now just goes to the full Senate for a vote, and if it's passed there, then it would go to the governor. So kind of clearly shows that with some of these bills being fast tracked, that when there's a will, there's a way, and bills can move quickly at the Roundhouse, and we're certainly seeing that with this immigration detention center bill.
Yeah. Well, I was curious to ask you about that, Dan. I know last year, of course, there was a 60-day session. What have you seen so far this year? There's sometimes a perception that the 30-day session, well, nothing's going to get done, but it seems like there's a lot of action, every week here. Like there's a lot of movement on these
I
bills.
think, I mean, there's some similarities to last year in that they are fast tracking some bills, certainly the immigration detention center bill. There's also a road funding bill that's already on the governor's desk, and we're expecting her to sign it in the coming days. So I think that's becoming more of an approach, some bills to kind of get them across the finish line more quickly, but then other issues, when it comes to public safety, which I know you talked to Nikayla McClelland about last week, and when it comes to medical malpractice, I think those issues won't get resolved until the final days of the session. We won't know whether they pass or not. And when it comes to the budget, probably the same. The Senate will make its own changes to the budget, and typically that doesn't then get approved until the final days of the session. So, I think we're still seeing which bills and which issues maybe have the traction they need. But in that way, I think some things don't change, and the fates of a lot of bills don't get decided until the final, 72 hours or so of the session.
And I know the Clear Horizons Act is another one that is getting a lot of attention this year that would codify some of the state's emissions reductions goals. Yeah, are we going to see anything on that this week?
Yeah. So Tuesday morning in Senate Conservation Committee is going to take up that bill. It'll be its first hearing of this session, and it's significant because this is the last chance for this executive order that Governor Lujan Grisham signed shortly after taking office in 2019 to be codified in state law. There'll be a new governor at this point next year, and so that order could stay in place or it could be repealed. So I think there's some urgency from supporters to get it passed. I think critics or skeptics of the bill have concerns about what it would mean for the state's oil and gas industry, which generates a huge amount of the state's revenue. So I imagine there'll be pushback from them. We saw a similar version of the bill last year, and it stalled in a Senate committee. So, we'll see whether it has momentum this year to maybe make it across the finish line. I know talking to the bill sponsor, Senator Mimi Stewart, she said that there were some changes made this year to try to address some concerns that folks had, but that's a real significant piece of environmental legislation that we expect to generate a lot of debate in the coming weeks. And as we get into the final, 2 weeks of the session, a lot of that is just kind of jockeying to make sure your bill gets on these committee agendas and then gets called up on the floor. So, half the battle is just trying to, get on these committee agendas when there's a limited amount of time.
And we saw that play out today. The committee that heard the Immigrant Safety Act was originally going to hear Senate Bill 17, which is the kind of the big gun bill this year, would impose a ban on certain semi-automatic weapons, dubbed assault weapons, and would impose new restrictions, new requirements for security on gun shops. And we're expecting to hear more about that. We'll continue to cover that, as well as other bills that are moving through the roundhouse as we sort of head into the final weeks here. Dan, any final thoughts as
Yeah,
we wrap up this episode?
a couple final thoughts. I mean, that gun bill will certainly be a big one. I know it's generated a lot of opposition from gun retailers in the state who feel it kind of unfairly goes after them. Other public safety bills too. We'll see. Juvenile justice is another issue. A lot of talk about it going into the session. So far, there hasn't been too much movement, but that could certainly change. And I would imagine, as people get a little more sleep deprived, and we could see some temper shortening a little bit over the coming weeks. But we'll certainly be here covering as much as possible. And just for anyone watching, John and I don't intentionally coordinate our outfits, just kind of happened today to be wearing similar shirt and tie combos. But we really appreciate everyone listening to Journal Podcasts. And you can follow our coverage at abqjournal.com and find these podcasts on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. So any parting thoughts from you on how the session's going, John?
No, just I keep pushing for a fashion roundhouse story, because there are a lot of interesting outfits in here. Not Dan and I, of course. We stick with sort of general reporter attire, but there's a lot of interesting things happening this year here, and it's been really interesting covering it with you, Dan, and with Eddie Moore, our staff photographer, who's been all over the roundhouse. Keep an eye out for his photos in print and on our website, abqjournal.com, and more to come. Stay tuned. We'll have another episode probably before the end of the week.
Yeah, thanks. The fun is just beginning, and we appreciate everyone following along our coverage.